Hi, folks. Glad to have a chance to be with you, even if only virtually. We're all going through tough times right now, and I know that just as each of us has different challenges, I'm sure we all have different ways of dealing with what's going on. What I find is that opening my heart to God's love helps me remember that no matter what my outer problems may be, I'm ultimately held and cared for by a love that is stronger than any challenge this world has to offer. I mean, there are times that's hard to feel, but I still trust God, that God's love is there whether I feel it or not. Now, today's gospel reading is a parable that Jesus tells, saying what the realm of God, or sometimes called the kingdom of heaven, is like. And it's a funny thing, because although the landowner in this story is showing incredible generosity to the latecomers, those who work through the heat of the day are understandably pissed. Now, God seems to have this impact on some people. We see the same thing in the story of the prodigal son. The father is incredibly and amazingly forgiving of his profligate son, but who took his share of the father's estate and squandered it in riotous living. So the hard-working son who stayed behind is furious. And Jesus recognizes that. It's the odd nature of God's realm that it turns things upside down. Many of the first shall be last, and the last shall be first. See, God isn't into fairness. God is into forgiveness and love. God's realm doesn't work on a time clock. Now, it seems pretty clear that God is the landowner in this parable, and we are invited to be the workers. And that reminds me of the previous sermon I gave about how in Genesis 2, God created humans to be gardeners in the Garden of Eden. Well, it's clear that for this earth to become the Garden of Eden once again, God could use a few more workers. We all know how human greed and short-sightedness are damaging the environment and adding to the climate crisis. And while it may seem hopeless, like the polluters have all the money and the power, and we have none, but if we take up God on the offer to work in the vineyard, I believe we'll discover that God's pattern of making the first be last and the last be first is still at work. See, I'm convinced that spiritual actions are far more powerful than physical actions. And love is the most powerful action of all. The opposite of love isn't hate. It's the sense of separation, of dissociation that's behind all the crises our world is facing, from environmental issues to our political divisiveness, to racism, to poverty. But God's profoundly unifying love and forgiveness is ultimately healing. And to me, that is the realm of God. We all know the earth is hurting. Our culture has objectified the earth, abused the earth, and she's deeply wounded. But we can become workers in the vineyard, and our love will make a difference. See, that's the nature of God's realm. The tiny thing, the size of a grain of mustard seed, grows and flourishes and nourishes. The mighty are fallen. The last will become first. Now, like many people before me, I experience Earth as a living being. She gave me birth. She nourishes me. I'm profoundly touched by her beauty. When I feel cut off from myself, I only need to walk in nature to feel reconnected. Almost every day, I do a simple practice. I envision the earth as a whole. And then I place her in my heart and fill her with love. And when I feel both earth and heart filled with love, I release her to God. You can find your own ways to be a worker in God's vineyard. You could plant a vegetable or sit under a tree for an hour. you might feel that you commune with the soul of the earth. If we heal our relationship with the earth, I'm confident that with God's help, she will heal herself, far beyond our knowledge of how to do so. And God is perfectly capable of turning the earth into the Garden of Eden once again. It only takes a few of us. In 1787, a group of 12 Quakers formed the Society for the Abolition of the Slave Trade in London, England. Within 20 years, the work led by this tiny group led to the end of the international slave trade. That's why Margaret Mead said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." A landowner went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. Some came, but not enough. So he went out again and again throughout the day, hiring more and more, but it still wasn't enough. And now it's nearly the end of the day, and he's asking us to work in his vineyard as well. He's asking us to work in his vineyard as well. God needs our help to keep this earth and so much of what lives on it from dying. God needs our help to change the culture of self-centeredness, of worshiping power and greed, to a culture of love and forgiveness. It may be late, but if we say yes, I believe we can make these changes. There are more than enough of us to do it. So let's roll up our sleeves and get to it. Amen.